Hi, I'm Maz Riley, a producer here at Forbes Breaking News. Joining me today is AtlasIntel U.S. election lead analyst Pedro Azevedo. Pedro, thank you for joining me today.
For having me, Miles. It's a pleasure.
So, AtlasIntel released a new post-debate poll last week, 1,700 likely voters, that has Trump over Harris by 2.9 points. So, just walk me through that. What are some of the main takeaways?
Well, it's first of all a bit of an unexpected result, I think, even for us here at Atlas, because we have been seeing over the last few months, ever since Harris took over the Democratic candidacy from Biden, a lot of enthusiasm for her in the media. And in our first poll back in July, right after the Democrats made the switch, we saw a big jump from Biden's numbers to where Kamala was then. Um, and so we maybe expected this to be a little bit closer by now. But what we've seen is actually very, very little variation between that July poll and now. We see, like you said, Trump 3 points ahead of Harris, with in fact 50.9% of votes in our poll, so over half of the national popular vote. Um, and that's well, it seems to us, looking at our results here, that maybe while this enthusiasm certainly has benefited Harris and benefited the Democrats, and she's definitely a lot stronger than Biden was when he dropped out. Our last poll with Biden had him, I think, 5 points behind Trump. Our last public poll with Biden, and our numbers right before he dropped out were at almost 8, 9 points behind Trump. Um, but it shows that maybe that Harris still has a long way to go, maybe to convince maybe the electorate beyond the Democrats, right? Maybe she's rallied the base around her and she's doing a lot better than Biden was, but still a long way to go.
So I just want to run through some of the demographics on this poll. Harris is polling roughly the same with white voters as Biden did in 2020, which is around 41%. Trump has actually seen a slight decrease from 58% in 2020 to 56.9% in your most recent poll. But interestingly, Trump has improved his performance among minorities, particularly among Hispanic voters, where he has seen a roughly 10-point improvement from the 32% that he received in 2020 to around 42.2%, which is what you guys have in your poll. He's also performing very well among Black voters, where he has received 25% of the vote, compared to Kamala Harris's 75%, which would be an exceptionally low performance for a Democratic candidate. Um, is the rising support among minority voters, is that what's giving Trump the edge over Harris?
Yes, that's a big part of it. That, and also among young voters, we also see a big difference here. Trump and Harris a lot closer than Trump and Biden were in 2020. And, again, we see some improvement here with Harris. Biden's numbers here before he dropped out were even worse. And we attribute that especially to the economic situation, to inflation, which you can see in our poll that is listed as the top concern for most Americans. If I'm not mistaken, I have the numbers here. That's 55.4% of Americans listed the cost of living among their top concerns for the United States today. Um, and Trump has been specifically targeting these demographics, right? Minority voters and younger voters, where he identified maybe a weakness in 2020, and has been an explicit strategy from his campaign. And these are demographics that are young people and minority voters. They're usually more vulnerable to the impacts of rising inflation and of the cost of living, right? Um, Especially in a scenario as we've seen in the Biden administration. Maybe we can talk about the special circumstances that got us here, coming out of the COVID pandemic and everything. But the fact is that uh, the US has seen levels of inflation that it hadn't seen in decades, maybe. And so that's especially is in the public that's therefore not very used to dealing with inflation and to seeing their cost of living rising so rapidly. It's a bit of a shock, and that's still the dominant theme in this election, and that's where we identify maybe the biggest weakness here for the Democratic candidacy.
I do want to briefly talk about the inflation. Inflation has come down since Biden took office, and we haven't really seen the 6, 7, 8% that we were seeing in 21 and 22. But Democrats have struggled to distance themselves from the issue of inflation. And most voters do trust Trump to handle the economy and lower prices over Harris. In your poll, Trump had a 14-point lead over Harris when it came to the economy and lowering prices. Is this a huge motivating factor for undecided and previous non-voters that's going to lead them to voting for Trump?
Yes, and that's again even among the demographics that swing most for Biden in 2020. That's exactly what's sort of creating this. It's even creating these undecided voters, right? Maybe they don't like Trump. Again, he has a record of offensive statements and policies against minorities. He was very unpopular among young voters, but now exactly these people are the people that are feeling the most the impact of inflation, and these are the people that want change. And now maybe they don't want to vote for Trump, but they really feel like they have been maybe left behind and they've suffered the worst impacts of sort of this economic situation that is associated with Biden and with Kamala now. And like you said, exactly because I think she is associated with the administration, right? She's the vice president. We see the lowest confidence in Kamala here is exactly in these economic matters, as well as in immigration, right? Which is Trump's top. Which has always been, Trump's defining sort of issue, right? And it's also a topic that lends itself well to these narratives in moments of um, of troubled economic times, right? It's an easy narrative tool to point to, the high levels of border crossings and point to, oh, these people are coming here. You're struggling economically, and these people are coming here and they're taking the opportunity that should be yours. So, this is, I think, the fact that immigration is also a high pressure point in this election has also a lot to do with the economic situation.
As you mentioned, Trump is famously hard on illegal immigration. He himself has said that he wants to conduct the largest deportation effort in U.S. history. Is immigration and the border crisis improving his support among voters? And particularly, how is that affecting swing states that are close to the border, such as Arizona and Nevada?
Well, we see exactly, and again, as we said, we talked about the inflation and the cost of living being a top priority for 55% of respondents in our poll, and then the economy and the job market, and then roughly in the same sort of level of around 50% of voters comes immigration. So it's been a very high salience topic. Um and we have good reason to believe from the fact that it's a high salience topic and that it's the issue where he performs the best in our poll against Harris, that it's a strong driver for Trump's support. And that's going to especially be the case, perhaps in Arizona, especially, right, which is closest to the border. And it's also where we've seen we're still in the process of producing and releasing our swing state polls. But even in general polls, which have better results for Harris than ours, when you look at swing state polls, Arizona is still one of the reddest there, right? So there's still a strong source of support for Trump there.
So the debate was about a week ago. According to your poll, 47.6% believe that Kamala won compared to 39.1% for Trump, which is quite a large difference. And I think the general consensus is that she did perform particularly well in the debate. Um, despite riding the momentum since she entered the race, performing well at the debate, she's still trailing Trump. And is this due to just a general lack of trust from voters when it comes to her being able to handle these core issues like immigration, like inflation, like the economy?
Yes, I would say so. I'd say that I would point, in fact, even to back to this question that about who do voters trust more in each topic, right, in each issue. I would point to the question on reproductive rights, on abortion, which is maybe the strongest issue for Democrats, and it's definitely the weakest issue for Trump in our poll. And it shows that 44% of Americans trust him more than Harris to deal with abortion in this case, um, which is his worst result by a lot in this question. But we still see that even in this issue where he performs poorly, we don't see a big advantage for Harris. Harris is preferred by 46% of voters here. And there are 11% of voters here that say they don't know, which is also the highest number for the highest levels for don't know in this question, out of all the issues. Um, and I think that's very emblematic of that, of this idea that, oh, even if I, your average American voter, am concerned about the state of abortion rights in the country, for example, and even if I think that Trump would worsen that situation, maybe I'm still not convinced that Kamala can deliver, really restore, codify Roe v. Wade into law or whatever would it be. Maybe I'm still not convinced about that, right? Those 11% of sort of undecideds in this question about abortion rights, I think it's very telling as an example of what we're going through, right? And that Kamala is still maybe undefined still in the eyes of voters, right? She's still even though she performed really well in the debate, and like you said, our poll shows that people tend to agree that maybe there's still something missing for those voters to make the jump and to join her coalition and to maybe shore up those numbers a bit.
RFK Jr., who was the leading independent candidate, dropped out of the race in late August and endorsed Trump. How has him dropping out of the election affected the race? Are we seeing a shift from RFK voters over to Trump?
A slight shift. We think that we saw a slight, fluctuation, positive fluctuation for Trump, like I said, between July and now. And I would say that that has to do with some of the voters that were still in the RFK Jr. camp. Because in the last poll we did, the last public poll we did with Biden in June, right, I mean, right at the time of the debate, right before the whole collapse of his candidacy, um, RFK Jr. was polling at 10% in our scenario that featured third party candidates. And then in our first poll with Kamala Harris, he had dropped to 5%, and Kamala was doing a lot better than Biden was. So I think that what we see here um, is that the voters who were undecided and dissatisfied with both Biden and Trump and didn't want uh, any of them to be president, but leaned more towards the Democrats, they jumped ship from the Kennedy candidacy at that point, right? When the shift happened, these people went, oh, okay, I don't want to vote for Biden, but I can vote for Kamala. And so what was left of RFK Jr.'s candidacy was um, some people that were, that would lean Trump, and some people that would not vote either way, that would have voted for Kennedy as a protest vote, or the specific that kind of conspiracy vote, right? And that kind of, oh, the system is rigged, and I'm going to support the candidate that shows everyone how the system is rigged. And so a lot of these voters, maybe they were not going to vote anyway, but if they had to choose between Trump and Harris, they would likely be more supportive of Trump, right? So after he dropped out, though his voters that were leaning toward Trump, they certainly came over to his side. But also, I would say there has been a lot of, people that were going to vote for him and now are not going to vote at all.
So in despite his efforts to, he is RFK Jr. will be on the ballot in certain states in November. Is it likely that he's going to pull support from Trump? Or, as you said, are his supporters a little bit disillusioned to a point where they're just simply going to sit this election out?
I would say it's more likely that what they will sit it out. I think exactly the kind of person that would go out and vote for RFK Jr. and give that protest vote, even if he's not running anymore just because he's on the ballot. That's more likely than not a voter that would have just stayed home otherwise, right? This is not someone that could have been convinced to vote for Trump on election day, and then you see RFK Jr.'s name on the ballot and you change your mind. I think the people that are coming out and going to vote for him, they're just going to stay home, or we're going to see a little bit of a vote for him, but these probably are not going to be people that would otherwise vote for Trump.
So AtlasIntel is consistently rated as a top pollster. In fact, you were the most accurate pollster in 2020. In July, AtlasIntel had Trump with a 2.1 lead over Harris. Since then, it has grown to a 2.9 lead. During the same time frame, however, Harris has improved in other polls, particularly after her debate performance, and the Real Clear Politics polling average has her with a 1.7 lead over Trump. So is your poll an outlier? And why are your polls trending in the opposite direction from the general consensus?
Well, I would say, I mean, definitely comparing with the bulk of the polls that are coming out in the United States right now, it is an outlier, certainly, and I feel like that's why it's called so much attention, right? Um, but we're certainly confident in our model. I think we can attribute that to our definition of sort of modeling how turnout is going to go, right? Because of course people can just trying to find that likely voter, right? The person that we target in our polls. Um, but I would say that it's not necessarily that it's a very small sort of fluctuation for Trump, right? Well within our margin of error. So I would just point out that it's sort of a static race here more than necessarily that the situation has improved for Trump or anything like that. Um, it's just that, maybe perhaps that initial wave of support that for Harris, we've already captured most of its effects on our July poll. And, maybe this has shifted uh, in other polls in the United States. They've captured this evolution, and we've been seeing this for a longer time, maybe. And so that's maybe we think all that came, since July, we've already captured most of what the impact of that initial wave of enthusiasm would be, right? But perhaps also, now that we didn't capture, of course, any immediate post-debate shifts, but immediate post-debate shifts are very rare, right? The people that are watching the debate and immediately go, oh, okay, now I love Harris and I want to vote for her. Um, I think I would say that we can still see some improvement for Harris over, this last week and next week, as the repercussions, the positive coverage of her debate performance sort of settles into the minds of the voters. So, there's still room for Harris to improve here.
So if you look at the polling from Biden to Trump, Biden was consistently trailing Trump by quite a few points. In this poll, Harris is still losing, but she has cut the deficit between the gap that exists between Biden and Harris. So is this poll necessarily bad news for Kamala? As you said, it's well within the margin of error. So the race is statistically speaking a tie essentially, and it's very competitive. So does the Harris campaign need to be concerned about this poll?
Well, I don't think they should be concerned. I think they should, of course, take it into consideration, right? But I think I would say it's just a matter of expectations. I mean, like I mentioned, we've been seeing this wave of enthusiasm for Harris since she took over the candidacy, right? And the Democratic convention was a huge party, and the party seemed all aligned in sort of um, getting her elected and defeating Trump. Um, and I think maybe perhaps this media buzz and everything, and some polls that are a bit more favorable for her than ours. Again, like you said, it's statistically tied. It's a very close race, right? It's a difference of a few points. Um, though those slightly more positive polls for her may have generated a lot of a buzz, but I would mention, for example, the fact that just a week or two ago, the Harris campaign manager, right, Jen O'Malley Dillon, she published a memo where she stressed that the campaign was still the underdog here. And she was very criticized for it from a lot of sides, but I think perhaps the Harris campaign already has the view that this is a closer race than it has felt like in the last months, right? Um, and I think that that the Harris campaign's perspective that they're an underdog is still very correct. You're still going. Of course, Trump is he's had his indictments. He's had uh, endless controversy surrounding him. Right? He's tried to overturn the election. Uh, but even despite all that, he's still Donald Trump, and he's the possibly the most popular he's ever been. And he's been a force, the defining figure in US politics for the last 8 years, right? So you are running a relatively unknown and undefined vice president in a shorter campaign than usual against this candidate that seems to be basically a juggernaut of American politics, right? And so I think they may already have the appropriate attitude here, and right they can see that the race is closer than it looks, and that they still have a lot of work to do, especially to rebuild that Biden coalition, those young voters we were talking about, those minority voters we were talking about. Um, and which is exactly what our poll shows. So I think they should take note of it. But it seems to me that the Harris campaign already sort of has this attitude, and it's sort of the surrounding media environment and polls and partisan environment that was sort of had maybe too high of expectations of where she should be right now, right? I think this is a realistic assessment.
There are 48 days until the election. What are you looking for as we approach election day?
Well, I would certainly look for, well, first of all, we will soon publish our batch of swing state polls. So I'll certainly be looking at that. Typically, of course, the Republicans have a structural advantage in the Electoral College. So, if the race is tied, that's probably more favorable for Trump. But maybe the coalitions, the geographic distribution has shifted a bit. So maybe even with our national results, the swing states show a different picture. Um, and so first of all, I'll be looking at that. And then, like I said, I think there's a lot of potential right now for Harris to capitalize on the positive coverage of the debate and the positive repercussions of both how well she handled herself and how Trump seemingly uh, broke down and he went on these rants and brought up those ideas of immigrants eating dogs and whatever else. So I would say that right now is a good moment for Harris to see that growth that she needs to, get a more get stay remain competitive and get perhaps over the line. But I would also stress that we're not looking forward to any major shifts here. This is going to be a very close race. It's very unlikely that there is a big a big swing in the polls, either a Harris landslide or a Trump landslide. They're going to be very unlikely. This is still either way. This is going to be a very very close race. And finally, I would also point out, we're still in September. We have, like you said, around a month and a half to the election. And we all know the term October surprise, right? So we'll certainly be looking out for any exogenous shocks that could cause that sort of impact, and that could maybe change the state of the race entirely.
Do you think that there's an element to this election that is being overlooked?
Well, I would stress what we've already been talking about, actually, which is the idea that, and again, I think the Harris campaign knows this, but I think the general media and the general public are perhaps overlooking this, that even with this wave of enthusiasm and everything seems to be going right for Harris, that it's still going to be a very, very close race. And on top of that, we know that the Republicans are gearing up their legal machine to already prepare the possibilities of contesting the election, right? So I think, and that's not something the polls are going to account for, but uh, what the election will not be done just once the votes are counted, right? This is going to be a very turbulent time for the United States, even after the election passes. So I think we should be um, we should be paying a lot of attention to that. I think that's a very um, yeah. I mean, we're all focused on the election and on Harris and how well she's doing it, but this is going to be a close race, and there is going to be uh, contestations and legal battles and narrative battles and uh, legislative procedural maneuvers on January when they gather to count the votes. Uh, I mean so that there's still going to be a lot. This election is not going to end in November.
Well, Pedro, thank you so much for speaking to me today. I hope when you release your new swing state polls, you come back on and talk to us so we can break them down.
Of course, Miles, it'll be a pleasure.